Okay. Good evening, everyone. Good to see you. We're going to be introducing a new lesson today, a new topic of discussion. But before we do that, we're going to I'm going to ask you guys a few questions to kind of get the ball rolling. And so the first question that I want you guys to start thinking about is our world perfect?
No.
No.
No. Couple answers, shaking their heads, no. Okay. And within our world, within our structure, within our society, what determines the rules? What determines how we live? What determines what we have to, how we have to live our lives and our constraints? What controls us?
Politics. Our conscience.
Politics.
Laws.
Our conscience.
Peer pressure.
Laws. Government. Peer pressure.
Religion.
Excellent. So, within the laws and government politics aspect of things, what is the direction? What is the controlling laws, the larger aspect that directs the politicians what they can and can't do, what our government can and can't do? What is that? Does anyone know?
The Constitution.
Bingo. The
Boom.
Constitution. Outstanding. Absolutely. So the Constitution tells politicians and other aspects of government what it can and cannot do. So thinking about it from a standpoint of our world's not perfect, is the Constitution perfect?
No.
No. Right? It's not. Did the framers set the Constitution up in a way that they said, boom, we created it, it's fantastic, and we're good to go, we don't need to do anything, we don't need any changes?
No.
No, right? So what is the, we're talking about the Constitution being our overarching document that controls government and that tells us what the government can and can't do. And we were discussing that amendments are how we change the Constitution. Now, specific to the amendment process, does anyone know how amendments are created, proposed, passed, and become law?
Congress writes them.
Congress writes them, right? So we have an amendment. We're going to abolish school buses. That's the proposed amendment. How do we then pass that amendment and it becomes part of the Constitution?
Takes a 2/3 majority, doesn't it?
I'm just a bill.
There you go. You're getting there.
Yeah.
On Capitol Hill.
I'm just a bill on Capitol Hill.
So the amendment is brought up for a vote, is passed by both houses of Congress, and then ratified by 3/4 of the states. Does anyone know what that number is? 3/4 of the states?
Ooh.
50 states, 3/4 of them?
40, 35.
38. 38 states is needed, or 38 states are needed to ratify an amendment to the Constitution. Now that is the typical way in which amendments are passed and become part of the Constitution and become law, but there is another way. There is a second way that up to this point in our country's history hasn't been used. Does anyone know what that way is? No. It's called Article 5 Convention of States. And that's what our lesson is going to cover, is Article 5 Convention of States. Now, we're going to get into that a little further down the lesson, but before we get into that, this process involves a convention of states coming together and proposing several amendments, not just one or two. The convention proposes several amendments and then presents them to each individual state, and the same thing is required. 3/4 of the states are required in order to ratify any given amendment that is proposed. If 3/4 of the states agree, ratify, amendment becomes part of the Constitution. So, in an exercise to emulate that process, we're going to come up with a few amendment ideas of our own. They don't have to be, they can be anything. I mentioned earlier, abolish school buses. It doesn't have to necessarily be something specific to the government or what already exists. It could be anything that affects your own lives and what's going on in your life. You know, I know you students don't particularly care for homework. So your amendment can be to abolish homework. But remember that when we do this exercise at the end of the lesson, you're going to have to justify your amendment and convince your fellow students of why your amendment should be passed. So you have to keep that in mind while coming up with an idea that you might want to propose, because you're going to have to stand behind it and you're going to have to justify it. So that's going to keep you confined a little bit to something somewhat rational. So does anyone have a suggestion for an amendment that they would like to propose? Go ahead, Andrea.
No more school uniforms.
No more school uniforms. Okay. What else?
Healthier school lunches.
Healthier school lunches.
Think of longer lunch break. Put them together.
Healthier school lunches. Longer lunch break, is that what I heard?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Longer lunch break. How about we only go to school 4 days a week instead of 5?
Amen.
School week.
I love that. Shorter school week. Shorter school week. What else? What else can we come up with?
Less homework.
Less homework.
Boom.
Less homework. All right. Now again, these are proposed amendments that you guys are coming up with right now, but you need to remember that in the case of the Convention of States, you would need to convince 38 states to say, okay, I agree with you, Andrea, we should have no more school uniforms. I agree with that idea, I agree with that amendment, and we should include it in the Constitution, and it should become law, and that's that. And to convince 38 states to go along with you. So it's not an easy process. And in addition to that, before you even get there, you have to convince 2/3 of the state legislatures to even say yes to a convention. Before it can even happen, before you can even come up and propose these types of amendments and changes to the Constitution, you have to convince 2/3 or 34 states that we should all come together, that we have a reason that we believe in, or reasons that we believe in strongly enough that we should make changes to our world, our government, our society, and those changes should become law. So it's not an easy process, which is why it's never been done before. And we're going to learn more and more about the process and what it takes and how the process breaks down and what's completely needed, and we'll get a better understanding of why this process is so difficult, but at the same time, we're also going to learn why this process was included in the Constitution when it was first written.